While now accepted as the supreme law of the land, at the time of its ratification, the Constitution was the subject of tremendous controversy. Under its provisions, the Constitution had to be ratified by the vote in the special constitutional conventions in 9 of the 13 states. The Federalist Papers were a series of 85 articles and essays written between 1787 and 1788, intended to help ensure ratification of the newly proposed United States Constitution. The Federalist Papers were primarily aimed at convincing New York and Virginia to ratify. Originally titled The Federalist, most of the essays, 77, were published in New York newspapers. Later, all 85 were compiled in book form. This PowerPoint image is of the cover of Volume 1 of 2 of those books entitled Federalist, a collection of essays written in favor of the new Constitution as agreed upon by the Federal Convention, September 17, 1787. The Federalist Papers were written anonymously by 3 founding fathers under the pseudonym Publius. Alexander Hamilton, future first Secretary of the Treasury, was the driving force behind the writings. He recruited fellow writers James Madison, future President, and John Jay, future first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, as co-writers. Hamilton is said to have authored 51 of the 85 Publius Papers, Madison 29, and John Jay 5. The actual number each really wrote remains disputed. It is likely Madison wrote more than 51, but that cannot be decisively proven. Whether or not the U.S. Constitution, pictured in the slide, was to be ratified was the subject of a great American debate between 1787 and 1788. The controversy raged throughout post-Revolutionary War America, in the taverns, over dinner tables, in the streets, and in newspapers. Those in favor of ratifying, like the authors of the Federalist Papers, Hamilton, Madison, and Jay, were known as Federalists. Those opposed, like future Vice President George Clinton, were anti-Federalists. Clinton, although anti-Federalists, considered this new instrument of government a threat to the people's rights and privileges, especially before it contained a Bill of Rights. Well-written, argued, the Federalist Papers were a partisan statement. Ultimately, they were arguably actually unnecessary for ratification. This is so because while Madison led the ultimately successful Federalist forces in Virginia, and Hamilton and Jay led them in New York, the Constitution had already been ratified by the required 9 states by the time those 2 states ratified. Despite the fact the Constitution was ratified without needing the votes from the very states they were primarily designed to influence, Virginia and New York, the writings are relevant. Since the early 1800s, they have been used in colleges and universities to teach constitutional history and political philosophy. Moreover, the U.S. Supreme Court has cited them over 200 times to discern the intentions of the framers and ratifiers of the U.S. Constitution. The most important secondary source I used in my research was Great Books, The Western World, Volume 43, edited by Robert Maynard Hutchins. A copy of the cover is pictured in the slide. This book contains a complete copy of all 85 Federalist Papers. This made it easy to quickly research a primary source inside the secondary source, which I found helpful when verifying or forming an opinion on what was said. In the editor's biographical notes, Hutchins discusses the controversy surrounding the adoption of the Constitution. He discusses both the Federalist point of view and the point of view of the anti-Federalists, like future Vice President George Clinton, who wrote anonymously against adopting this new instrument of government. Hutchins provides biographical information about each of the authors of the Federalist Papers: Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. He placed them in an historic context, not simply limiting their discussion to their work on the Federalist Papers. Hutchins also argued that the Federalist Papers have been important tools for constitutional interpretation throughout the centuries, since being introduced by President Jefferson and Federalist co-writers President Madison as a part of the study of political philosophy at the University of Virginia in the early 1800s. My best primary source is the Federalist Papers themselves. These 1787 to 1788 writings are individually numbered and address the myriad of arguments against adopting the U.S. Constitution. Indeed, primary author Alexander Hamilton pictured in the slide wrote in Federalist No. 1, "I shall endeavor to give satisfactory answer to all the objections which shall have made their appearances, and may seem to have any claim to your attention." These partisan papers address the major concerns of those opposing ratification, the anti-Federalists. For example, in Federalist No. 10, Madison advocated a large commercial republic and said a large republic could help prevent rule by majority faction. Madison's essay Federalist No. 51 calls for a system of checks and balances. Interestingly, Hamilton argued against a separate Bill of Rights in Federalist No. 84. He feared such a bill would mean those enumerated would be the only rights left to the people rather than leaving the people all rights not expressly given to the government. Many anti-Federalists opposed the Constitution specifically because it did not initially offer a Bill of Rights. This slide shows the steps of the United States Supreme Court because my best article from a periodical was "The Supreme Court and Opinion Content." The Use of the Federalist Papers by Pamela C. Corley, Robert M. Howard, and David C. Nixon. The scholarly article explores how significant the Federalist Papers have been in U.S. Supreme Court cases. It explores how and when Supreme Court scholars and justices use the Federalist Papers to justify their positions or explain their opinions in court cases. These respected writings are frequently used as an important original source. The authors argue that the Federalist Papers are often cited tactically as protective cover for unpopular legal opinions. They are used to assert legitimacy of legal arguments to fellow justices, the government, and the public. The authors point out that the Federalist Papers have been cited by the United States Supreme Court over 200 times. The article illustrates how over 200 years since they were authored, the Federalist Papers remain relevant into the modern day. The Constitution of the United States has been the supreme law of the land for over 200 years. Its 1789 ratification was not always assured, however. Rather, it was a subject of tremendous controversy throughout the land. The Federalist Papers, originally tied to the Federalists, were a series of 85 articles and essays written between 1787 and 1788 by three of America's founding fathers: Alexander Hamilton, future president; James Madison, pictured in the slide; and future Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Jay. Their partisan goal was to help ensure the Constitution ratification. Many anti-Federalists who did not want to adopt the new instrument of government in the new nation opposed them and wrote counter-arguments to the Federalist Papers. For the Constitution itself, only 9 of the original 13 states had ratified it. This threshold had already been met by the time the two states the Federalist Papers were most intended to influence, Virginia and New York, finally voted to ratify. Thus, the Federalist Papers were arguably ultimately unnecessary for ratification. Despite that, the Federalist Papers remain important historic papers. For over 200 years, they have been used by historians, in colleges, and by courts to help understand and interpret the Constitution. They remain a guidepost for scholars and judges to the present day.